Okay. Just one item for all of you at the top, and I just have a hard out at 5 of, but I think we can get around to everybody in the room. Today, the president spoke with New York City Mayor Eric Adams to express his heartfelt condolences and offer his support following yesterday's devastating fire at a Bronx apartment building, which took the lives of at least 19 people. In the wake of this terrible tragedy, the president wanted to reach out to offer comfort and also offer support in case there's anything the mayor needs. Our hearts go out to everyone who was impacted, and we're very appreciative of the heroic work of the first responders who were on the scene so quickly. I know some of you have asked about assistance. I'm not aware of any requests for federal assistance, but of course we will let you know if there's anything to share, and we will remain in close contact with leaders there as well. With that, Zeke, why don't you kick us off?
Thanks, Jen. Starting with the talks in Geneva right now, has the president been briefed on the rounds of negotiations of the past couple of days, and what is the current U.S. government assessment of Russian intentions when it comes to eastern Ukraine?
Well, the president meets, as you know, regularly with his national security team, members of his national security team, as he did this morning. I don't mean a formal NSC meeting. I mean the regular PDB meeting where he receives regular updates. As you know, those talks just ended late this morning. I think you probably have all seen Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman did a briefing following the conclusion of those as well. I would just reiterate some of the points that she made, of course, that these talks were frank and forthright. And there was a discussion from the U.S. side of what our expectations are, and a reiteration of what you've heard the president say and what you've heard many officials from the United States say, which is that there are two paths for Russia to take at this point, for President Putin to take. He can take the path to diplomacy. There's 2 more rounds of talks this week. We've seen them as a package of 3, which I think they also reiterated from their side. Or there's a path of escalation. We are certainly hopeful that the path to diplomacy is the path that they will take. There are, of course, a range of topics discussed during that meeting, including a reiteration of what is at stake should they decide to move forward and invade Ukraine. In terms of an assessment of where they stand, I would really leave that to the Russians to articulate. We can't give an assessment of that from here, and Deputy Secretary Sherman did not as well.
And what would it look like for the Russians to choose the diplomatic path? Does that mean they have to withdraw some of their forward deployed forces on the border with Ukraine in order to have that more sustained engagement, or is it just not invading further would keep the diplomatic pathway conversation alive?
Well, Zeke, there are 100,000 troops at the border now. Obviously, returning troops to the barracks, conveying to us their intention of doing that would be easy ways to show de-escalation. As I noted a little bit earlier, we see this as a path, as a set of 3 rounds of conversations that will occur this week. As you've heard many of our national security officials state, but I will reiterate from here, no talks about Europe without Europe, no talks about Ukraine without Ukraine, and that is certainly our mentality. So we are moving forward with the other 2 rounds of talks and discussions here, but absolutely the aggressive action, the bellicose rhetoric came from the Russians, so they have the ability and the power to de-escalate.
Turning to the president's trip tomorrow to Atlanta, Corinne got this question on the plane on Friday, but a number of advocates for voting rights and other issues down there have said the president should not come down unless he has a plan to actually pass voting rights legislation. What is the president's plan to pass that, or is he going down there without a plan?
Well, his plan is to sign voting rights legislation into law. That requires a majority of senators to support it, even if there are changes to the Senate rules, which is something the president has expressed an openness to. But let me give you a little bit of a preview of what people can expect to hear from him tomorrow. I would just note that the backdrop of where he's going is vitally important here as we were planning the trip. It's in a place with profound civil rights history, the Atlanta University Center Consortium on the grounds of Clark Atlanta University and Morehouse College in Atlanta. The president will forcefully advocate for protecting the most bedrock American rights, the right to vote, and have your voice counted in a free, fair, and secure election that is not tainted by partisan manipulation. He'll make clear in the former district of the late Congressman John Lewis that the only way to do that are for the Senate to pass the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. He will follow his remarks from last week on the anniversary of January 6th, where he did touch on voting rights and that fundamental importance of protecting that right, when an unprecedented insurrection sought to violently overturn the outcome of what the Trump administration's top election security officials confirmed was the most secure election in history, by saying that he will stand in the breach and keep fighting for the soul of America. And he'll also describe this as one of the rare moments in a country's history when time stops and the essential is immediately ripped away from the trivial, and that we have to ensure January 6th doesn't mark the end of democracy, but the beginning of a renaissance for our democracy, where we stand up for the right to vote and have that vote counted fairly, not undermined by partisans afraid of who you voted for or try to reverse an outcome. I would also note one other piece I think you will hear more from him on tomorrow is he's quite focused on how ensuring the American people understand what is at stake here. Sometimes we all shorthand legislation or shorthand what we're talking about, and protecting the fundamental right to vote means he's going to also talk about what the changes have meant in states like Georgia across the country, what is at stake for voters in Georgia and other states across the country, and why this is so imperative it move forward.
And lastly, Senator Schumer set a deadline of a week from now for the Senate to pass this legislation or change Senate rules. The president optimistic that that could happen on that time frame, or does he think that that is maybe too ambitious?
Well, he's going to continue to work in lockstep with Leader Schumer on moving this vote forward. But beyond that, we're taking it day by day to press for the vote to happen and to be successful. Go ahead.
Just following up on some of those questions. So on Atlanta, will Stacey Abrams be joining the president during any of these remarks?
Andre, I know we'll have a list. There will be a number of elected officials joining us, traveling, and also there. I think we're still finalizing that list, and we will venture to get you that as soon as possible.
Okay. And then just our favorite topic is the Fed nominations that we were expecting in December. Can you give us any kind of guidance on when we could expect those?
We hope to.
A little bit more specific than soon.
I wish I had something more specific to deliver to you today, but I can just continue to reiterate, the president looks forward to announcing those soon.
Okay, and then just on the Fed, Warren has spoken out about reports that indicate that Governor Clarida made some purchases and sales and is calling for greater transparency. Is this an issue that the president is engaged on? And do you think it's time for a kind of a more serious look at what the rules are that govern the Federal Reserve's actions? And
The Federal Reserve, including independent agencies, should be held to the highest ethical standards, including the avoidance of any suggestions of conflicts of interest. The Fed is obviously an independent agency, as I've stated a few times. It has its own ethics rules and requirements, including the new rules issued in October to address conflicts, and so we defer to that agency about any specific follow-ups.
And just to follow up on the issue, on that issue with the Fed, so I understand it's an independent agency, but if an independent agency if officials at an independent agency are not following the rules to the letter, or if those rules don't seem like they're covering the whole thing, is it time to take a closer look, even beyond what happened in October?
Well, again, Andrea, I think the president respects the independence of the Federal Reserve. I just noted that they have their own ethics rules and requirements. They put new rules in place in October. I'd point you to them, but the president's expectation that all government agencies and officials, including independent agencies, are held to a high standard, with high ethical standards, avoiding conflict of interest speaks for itself.
One more question on COVID. So we know that the rapid test contracts have gone out, but they've gone to companies that basically procure materials as opposed to companies that are manufacturing the tests. Are you satisfied that there's adequate testing, manufacturing capability in place and going to procure the tests?
Well, let me give you a little bit of an update on kind of a couple of timelines, or updates on timelines, I should say, on where things stand. We're working closely with manufacturers and distributors to understand what they can ship and by when, as well as actively working through the timelines for distribution. As you kind of touched on there in your question, there are several components of this. So we want to ensure that there's not only that physical test, but the ability to distribute them, which is what we're working through right now. We expect that the contracts are structured in a way to require that significant amounts are delivered on an aggressive timeline, the first of which should be arriving early next week. We expect to have all contracts awarded over the next 2 weeks, and then Americans will begin being able to order these tests online later this month. We also expect to have details on the website as well as a hotline later this week. So these are all components that we're working through and working to expedite as quickly as possible.
On the hospitalizations, which are now at a record level, is there anything that the federal government can do to augment the capacity of hospitals, which are now having to cancel selective surgeries, I think in something like more than half of U.S. states? Is that something where DOD could come in with mobile field hospitals, perhaps to just offer additional capacity?
Well, we actually have deployed a number of resources to surge resources over the course of the last several months. We will continue to do that, and we're working with local health authorities, state leaders, local leaders to determine where there are the greatest needs. But we have deployed a range of resources, many of them through FEMA, to ensure that local communities who have higher surges or needs in different ways, I should say, have resources from the federal government. Go ahead.
On the kind of nascent bipartisan talks related to kind of a more scaled back, targeted approach on the Electoral Count Act, your colleague Mr. Bates was quite definitive that wasn't really an option the White House was pursuing right now. It certainly was no substitute, I think, to use his words. As part of the reason for being so definitive on that is that you don't want an off-ramp for two Democratic senators in particular to point to instead of considering a rules change to the Senate.
I've always known my colleague, Mr. Bates, to be definitive. I don't know if you all experienced that as well. But I think what our position is from here and what the position of many advocates for voting rights and many Democrats on the Hill is that it is not a substitute. And we should not treat it like a substitute because the two bills that the president will talk about tomorrow have essential components of them that will protect people's fundamental rights, expand access, ensure that people know that when they vote, it will count and not be overturned. And we want to be very clear with the public that it is not a replacement or a substitute.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell has declared war on this effort over the course of the last several weeks on the Senate floor. His office put out a lengthy memo last night that said, in part, Democrats will try to use, quote, fake hysteria to break the Senate and silence millions of Americans' voices so they can take over elections. The president's been a little sharper towards Republicans. Do you have a response to that memo and Leader McConnell?
It is pretty ironic. If making it more difficult to vote is not silencing the voices of people, words that Senator McConnell used, I don't know what is. I also think it's important to note here, if you look back at Leader McConnell's record from the past, he has a pretty strong record of supporting voting rights. And what has changed? That's a question for him, less for us. But I will give you a few examples. 2004, Leader McConnell. I cannot think of any reason why anyone on either side of the aisle would oppose the protection of the franchise of all Americans. 2006, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 represents one of this country's greatest steps forward. Obviously, I rise today in support of its reauthorization. Again, 2006, he wrote in his memoir that he was overwhelmed to witness such a moment in history when the Voting Rights Act passed in 1965. So I use those examples to remind people that this should not be a partisan issue, protecting people's fundamental voting rights, that people should be protecting them and standing up for Americans of all political stripes. That is what we are working to do. And what we're talking about here is fighting against the big lie that was perpetuated after January 6th, around January 6th, I should say, by far too many Republicans in Congress, and it has resulted in states across the country putting in place more laws that are making it more difficult to people to exercise their rights. We don't think that is right. We don't think that is a political issue. It is a fundamental right in this country, and it should be.
One more, just on Build Back Better, because I have to ask about that at the press briefing. Look, I understand you guys can walk and chew gum at the same time, but in talking to Democrats in both chambers, some over here as well, there's just not a lot of sense that the conversations you guys have said are ongoing right now are going at a pretty significant clip or are substantive at this point. So where are you guys and what are the next steps here?
Well, our conversations are continuing behind the scenes at a staff level. And I can assure you that, and assure the American people, that the president is going to continue to press to get Build Back Better done, to ensure that we are lowering costs for Americans across the country. Most importantly, to ensure we are lowering costs for Americans across the country on child care, on elder care, on health care, addressing the climate crisis. We know that we need 50 votes in order to get that legislation done, and we need to figure out what that looks like to get that legislation done. But those conversations are happening behind the scenes, and the president remains absolutely committed to getting lowering costs for the American people. Go ahead, Kelly.
On voting rights, when you do hear the criticism from some advocates about don't come without the plan, or others who say the president has not been personally enough involved, as he heads to this, does he feel he has the political influence to be the tipping point this week?
Well, Kelly, it's a hard question to answer because really what we're talking about is whether we can get enough votes in Congress to get this done. And that's why I think it's important to note that the president will talk about this as a fundamental right for all Americans, something that there has been a history of supporting from both sides of the aisle, something that the public should expect and demand from their elected officials to support. I think we would dispute the notion that the president hasn't been active or vocal. He's given a range of speeches. He's advocated for voting rights to pass. He said it is a fundamental priority for his presidency, and he has agreed with his vice president that she would lead this effort. We understand the frustration by many advocates that this is not passed into law yet. He would love to have signed this into law himself, but tomorrow is an opportunity to speak about what the path forward looks like, to advocate for this moving forward in the Senate.
Can you speak to the role of the vice president tomorrow and what she will be talking about and how that relates to the president's message?
Absolutely. The vice president, of course, has an important role to play here as the person who is leading this effort and will continue to lead this effort from the administration. She has worked to date to help build a groundswell of support, something that many grassroots advocates have been working on for many years now, but she has met with a number of these advocates. She has engaged, and she's going to continue to speak about voting rights across the country. In terms of the preview of her remarks, we're not quite there yet. Maybe we'll have some more to say about hers and the president's later this evening. We'll see.
And as the president has heard feedback from Geneva on the state of the negotiations or conversations there, is he giving any sort of incremental instructions to Wendy Sherman and the team about things he would like introduced into the talks, or is he leaving that to be an on-the-ground sort of discussion for those who are in the room and handling it physically there?
Well, he is in regular touch with members of his national security team, and they are in touch with team members on the ground. So I would say we are looking again at this week as a set of conversations, and we will see and be able to assess where things stand better at the end of that. I will note a couple of things that as you're looking at this. We are preparing ourselves for the possibility and likelihood, no one should be surprised, I should say, if Russia spreads disinformation about commitments that have not been made, or if it goes even further and instigates something as a pretext for further destabilizing activity. And so we would continue to urge everyone not to fall for any attempts to push disinformation out there. But for the president, the most important thing to convey, and that he's conveying to his team, is that no talks about Europe without Europe, no talks about Ukraine without Ukraine. We had these discussions with the Russians today. There are important conversations that will be happening on the 12th in Brussels and the 13th in Vienna. And this is just one part of a three-set series of discussions happening this week. Go ahead. Oh, sorry, Peter, I'll come back to you. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Can I ask you for the latest on the Chicago schools closure dispute? The governor announced over the weekend the availability of tests. He previously sought the administration's help in procuring tests. Can you say whether the 350,000 they procured involved federal involvement at all, and whether those talks are ongoing? And broadly, do you have any message to both the Chicago Teachers Union and the Mayor of Chicago on what you hope to see there in the coming days? This, of course, is the fourth day in a row without any school
Well,
learning.
I would say first that we are in regular touch with the governor and his team, continue to convey, have those conversations behind the scenes. We have been very clear, publicly and privately, that we want to see schools open. That the president fought for additional assistance in the American Rescue Plan, $130 billion, including $5 billion that went to Illinois, $10 billion that went to testing across the country, to ensure we were prepared and had resources needed to address whatever may come up in the pandemic. But we are having these conversations. We are in regular touch with them, both the mayor and the governor, and we'll continue to see how we can assist from here.
Given the mayor is a prominent member of the president's party, has he spoken to her directly? I mean, does he feel the need to intervene here? It seems like a sort of an exceptional case in Chicago when so many other cities are reopening that it's bucking a trend in some ways.
Well, I'm not going to obviously speak for the mayor, but I think the mayor has also conveyed what her view is here as well. The president's view is that schools should be open across the country, and more than 95% are across the country. That the mental health impact on kids of not having schools open is very harsh and hard, and he does not want to see schools closed across the country. So that there is no secret about that. That continues to be what he states. That's why he fought for funding, and we will continue to be in touch with local leaders in Chicago to work to get their schools open.
Jake Sullivan had a statement over the weekend with regards to Iran and sanctions that
Yeah.
alluded to threats against American officials. Should we interpret from that the U.S.'s intelligence that there have been threats, in particular against Trump officials who were involved in the Soleimani strike?
Well, I'm not going to get into intelligence here from the podium, but we've certainly seen concerning public rhetoric from Iranian officials about individuals from previous administrations, even before sanctions from this weekend. And that's unacceptable. As the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, said in his statement over the weekend that you just referenced, as Americans, we have our disagreements on politics, on Iran policy, and other issues, of course, but we are united in our resolve against threats and provocations. We're united in the defense of our people, and we're going to protect and defend our own people, but I'm not going to get into more specifics. Obviously, they announced the sanctioning of more than 50 individuals and have made public comments in addition that are certainly available to anyone.
Right.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry.
Go on, you're fine. We're good.
Speaker
Go ahead.
Pelosi opened the door to maybe some sort of virus aid measure coming through. Do you have any new update on whether the White House is involved in any talks towards that? For instance, restaurants, of course, has had some traction in the Senate about a potential top-up of that fund.
Well, we certainly agree with Speaker Pelosi on a lot of things, but on the fact that, on what she said this weekend, which is that we're not going to let a lack of resources get in the way of fighting the pandemic. We have been in constant conversation with leaders and with the Hill and members about what may be needed, whether that's more to address COVID or small businesses and help keep them afloat. I don't have anything specific at this point in time, but we're going to continue to assess what the needs are and stay in close touch with them about that. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jen. I was home all last week, isolating.
Welcome back.
Thank you. I was isolating with COVID after a positive test, like a lot of people watching, and a lot of time in front of the TV. I heard the president say...
Did you watch Fox the whole time, or other things?
I have exhausted the full catalog of Guy Fieri content.
Oh, okay.
And obviously a lot of Fox. But I heard the president say, Google COVID test near me. So... somebody isolating with COVID, I did that, and the appointments everywhere were completely jammed. So why is it that you guys were so unprepared for the need for testing after the holidays?
Well, Peter, I'm happy to see you back and well. I would second say that there has been a massive surge in cases, as you know, and we're a part of, in D.C. and New York. And there's been an unprecedented, and other parts of the country as well, there's been an unprecedented demand for tests. So what we have done over the course of the last few weeks, even before that, is the president quadrupled our testing capacity since the summer. We opened 20,000 sites across the country, and we have also opened additional federal sites, including one in D.C., only recently. He's also provided, we've also in the process of sending 50 million tests out to community health centers and rural health centers. And now we're in the process of finalizing contracts for 500 million tests. But what can I make one more point and then you can go next? I would just note where we have come from. If you look to a year ago, there were no tests, or maybe one, depending on the timeline, that was available on the market. Now we have 9. If you look to about a year ago, there was about 900,000 or maybe slightly higher tests that were being issued every day. Now we're about 10 or 11 million. 300 million tests are done in this country every month. So there's enormous progress being made, but we needed to make sure the market was working on and increase our access to supply, and that's what we've been doing.
The tests you're talking about, though, require people to go somewhere and either make an appointment or wait in line. The CDC's guidance is if you think you have COVID, you're supposed to stay home. You guys said you were going to mail free tests to people that need them. The president's there on television talking about a winter of severe illness and death. While he's saying that publicly, why weren't you guys doing more to prepare for the winter?
Well, Peter, everyone decides where they're going to go get a test, and we make a range of options available. You can also purchase tests online. Later today, we'll have more details on how 150 million Americans who have health insurance can get reimbursed for tests. So we'll have more details on that later. The 500 million tests I noted, and I give you a little bit of an update on the timeline. We'll have more on the website later this week. So our steps and our process from the beginning has been expanding access to free tests to make it easy and more accessible for Americans, and we're continuing to build on what we've done to date.
But the president talked about a winter of severe illness and death. At the rate you guys are going, these tests are not going to be available until spring. So will you admit that these free tests you guys promised are not going to be ready until after the Omicron surge?
I think I gave an update earlier that we'll start to have tests out the door in the coming weeks, very soon. And
Okay.
again, that's not the only place people can get tests. There are a range of ways people can get tests online. Again, you'll know more about how you can be reimbursed for those tests from here. Go to different sites. There are federal sites opening up all around the country.
And we understand that you guys plan to rely on the Postal Service to send out these free tests whenever they're ready. But the Postal Service says they're going to have a staffing shortage because of your vaccine mandate. So would you pull back on the vaccine mandate if it meant getting people these free tests sooner?
The Postal Service also delivered 98, 99% of packages on time in advance of Christmas. And their leaders have also said they're eager to take on this challenge. So we welcome that, and we're looking forward to working with them to get these tests out to the public.
And I understand that the science says that vaccines prevent death. But I'm triple vaxxed, still got COVID. You're triple vaxxed, still got COVID. Why is the president still referring to this as a pandemic of the unvaccinated?
Well, I think, Peter, there's a significant difference between, and you just experienced this, and not to expose your public health experience, but I can speak to mine as well. I had been triple vaxxed. I had minor symptoms. There is a huge difference between that and being unvaccinated. You are 17 times more likely to go to the hospital if you're not vaccinated, 20 times more likely to die. And those are significant, serious statistics. So yes, the impact for people who are unvaccinated is far more dire than those who are vaccinated.
Will the president update his language at some time to be more reflective of the fact that people who are triple vaccinated are catching and spreading COVID?
I think the president has said, as have we a number of times, that there will be breakthrough cases. There will be people who get COVID here, at different media organizations, at companies around the world, around the country, who have been vaccinated. But there is a significant difference between being hospitalized or dying and being vaccinated with more mild symptoms.
And then last one, you guys have been very aggressive countering information. So what do you guys think about from the Supreme Court and Sonia Sotomayor's false claim that over 100,000 on ventilators?
Well, I'm not going to speak to Supreme Court arguments or statements made in those arguments, but I will tell you that what is at stake here is our effort to protect health workers and, most importantly, protect patients with the CMS rule, and also to make workplaces safer with the OSHA rule, which we have confidence in our legal argument for. So I will leave it to them to decide, but that's what's being argued now. Go ahead.
I know getting ahead of the president before a major speech is one of your favorite things to do.
That being said, I'm going to try this question anyway. You mentioned